Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Clouducation. I am Mike Earps, and today we're going to talk through a little bit of a different topic, and also with a new face to Clouducation. It's getting a little cold out, so I've grown the beard out a little bit, and unfortunately, Daryl's beard game is a little off these days, so he's working on that. So with that, I wanted to introduce Eric Bauer to the mix here for a nice little guest appearance, if you will. So Eric, if you want to give us a little bit of information on yourself and what we will be talking about here today, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. No, I appreciate it, and certainly glad to be joining you. And if it's due to the beard, I will certainly keep it. I have been working on this. It is getting a little colder outside, and we do need to work on Daryl's beard game for sure. So as Mike said, I'm Eric Bauer. I run marketing and business development here at AudioCodes. So really excited to be joining you on an episode of Clouducation. And kind of like we talked about, I think we're going to shift gears a little bit. We talk a lot about the Microsoft space, but today we want to talk a little bit more about the Cisco environment, an area that certainly has a lot from a telephony standpoint, and it's something that a lot of our customers talk about, but it is a little bit different than what we're used to talking about.
Yeah, that's for sure, especially in my world where I'm super laser focused on the Microsoft world, but. Yep. Sounds like you're probably referring to a little bit of the analog world, that thing that just doesn't seem to go away.
Well, that's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
It never goes away, right? It's still there.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I started at AudioCodes many moons ago, I was told don't worry about analog. It's really not that big of a deal. And here we are coming out with new products at AudioCodes related to analog, which was always interesting. But with that said, around analog, I think we could all agree. Anyone in our community knows it's still a real thing. And it's just not going away. And I always joke, and I think you've heard this one before, Eric. We're talking about the TDM sunset right now into SIP trunking, and we still have analog. It's just amazing to me. So some of the things around analog, I think that we want to touch on from a high level is making sure that customers have the ability to leverage those legacy technologies, especially in the Cisco space. Without really having to, invest a lot of money like they would in core infrastructure for future-looking things. So, if you were to say, what is the reason these companies would need some of these things? Any particular devices that stand out that continue that conversation?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things. One, you always hear about elevator phones, right? Every time you're in an elevator, you see a phone in there, they're all analog. Right, and changing that over to IP, not something that anybody's going to do anytime soon, right? If you're walking around a campus and you see these emergency phones out there, right? Often they've been analog since day one, and they're going to remain analog. So we see those. We see ringers, right? That are analog-based ringers. And one that you and I were talking about is these in manufacturing facilities, these lab phones or these hardened phones that, let's say there's a chemical accident, they just spray them down and they're good to go. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I think these are a lot of the things that continue to drive it. It's that cost benefit and that uniqueness that continue to drive these analog phones.
So you're saying there's no IP based lab phone that can be wiped down, sanitized, and basically thrown through the ringer?
If there is, it's certainly not the cost of the analog phone, and people don't want to spend the money in case something happens. Right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I would assume those guys get replaced more often than not. You think about hospitals and those phones that sit out in the common areas. People are hitting them with the different elbows or stretchers or whatever that goes through those hallways with the madness that happens there. You just don't want to spend a lot of money on that type of stuff. But obviously we've been doing analog for a long time and have a lot of different options with small devices and even the larger devices with some of the higher density stuff.
Sure.
But I guess I'm curious, Cisco is a close-knit community. So what the heck are we doing here talking about that? I mean, shouldn't they just use Cisco? I mean, that's what they do, right?
Yeah. So, for a long time, that's exactly what it was, right? Cisco, being a pure IP play, needed these voice gateways to translate to analog, right? There was really never a digital space that Cisco did. But what's been happening recently, this started back in 2010, their 48 port VG248, they announced end of sale and end of support, right? And they suggested, okay, instead of going with 148, go ahead and go with 224 ports, or the VG224. Well, back in 2015, they announced end of sale. End of support is going to be 2020. So what's happening is they're starting to end of life some of these technologies that fit this niche and this gap. And so in order to replace this 24 port VG224, they're now recommending the VG310, right? So the VG310, being a different class, is more expensive, first of all, right? It's a new version of an analog gateway, but it also has some requirements on the CUCM versioning side, which we've started to hear from customers might cause some complexities, right? If you're looking at, like you said earlier, you don't want to spend a whole lot of money in analog. And if your analog gateway is requiring you to do a significant upgrade of your core IP PBX, boy, that just doesn't seem to match. And so that's where we kind of fit in and can help provide options when these things are going on.
So basically, at the end of the day, there are Cisco pure technologies that can do these things, but probably not cost effective, and maybe not even just from the voice gateway side being cost effective or not, but also upgrading the CUCM side.
Yep.
And making the changes to the infrastructure there as well. Yep. That's really interesting. The complexities that would come along with some of the newer technologies, and so I guess it's safe to say that an AudioCodes voice gateway can connect to pretty much any Cisco environment.
Yeah, so there's definitely a couple of requirements, right? Going back to version 3 or version 4 of CUCM, I don't think anybody has that running, or at least I hope nobody has that running. But some of the version 7s and above, which are still quite old, our gateways can connect to. So we're really looking at this as an approach of finding the right solution that causes the least amount of change. And you also mentioned, that I want to touch on is, that Cisco has things to really meet everything. It might be more expensive, but where they actually, don't have a solution is on the higher end. You mentioned these high density analog gateways. We continue to invest, right? We're probably one of the last people that continue to invest in these high density analog gateways, things that 15, 20 years ago were commonplace. But that's really a differentiating factor too, because you have these Cisco PBXs that need to support these large analog environments. Think of a campus. You're not going to rewire everything right now, or a hospital, right? You've got these analog lines, put in a high density analog gateway connected to your Cisco IP PBX, and away you go, right? So there's a couple of different areas where it can certainly help.
I could see that also in like a hotel environment, if it's
absolutely
old analog in the room. I know a lot of them are moving to more of the modern, voice platforms, but man, putting those high value phones in a hotel room, I don't know.
I haven't seen many. You still see those old analog phones, right? And again, they want to upgrade the back end, which is awesome. Upgrade that to all IP, but in the rooms, keep the analog devices and just drive it with an analog gateway.
Yeah, it's not like you're doing presence and all those things from your hotel room to another. Hotel room.
I don't want people to know if I'm in there.
Yeah, you think not, right? But no, that's really interesting. The other piece to the Cisco environment that I hear quite often is, well, we're Cisco shop today. We're maybe integrating with some other platforms like Microsoft or Avaya, et cetera. We're just going to use Cube and make that happen. Cisco has that functionality already. Yeah. But I think there's potentially still reasons to leverage a third-party SBC in a pure Cisco environment and kind of help with some of the flexibility. So I know that we have a lot of conversations with our customer base and obviously our partners as well around migration and coexistence. So yeah, they might have a lot of infrastructure on the Cisco side, but there's, let's say, Microsoft and something else in the mix. And yeah, maybe it works to a certain extent, but those guys aren't working together to co-develop, right? I mean, there's going to be some limitations. So why not put an SBC in there from, say, obviously AudioCodes that is less or I should say more vendor agnostic and has a bit more flexibility. So I don't know what your thoughts are related to the SBCs in the Cisco world, but maybe give some context to the audience here as to how we can potentially help to alleviate some of the barriers that they might be experiencing.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a really interesting topic, right? Because again, vendors on the surface want to play together, right? If you want to connect Cisco and Avaya, you can do that without anything in between. You can do Microsoft and Cisco or Microsoft and Avaya without anything in between. But what we continue to see is that it's complex and they're not really driven to work together. So if something's not working and you call up Avaya and say, hey, can you help me get this working with Cisco? They're going to give some effort, but that's not really what they want to do. They're like, hey, why don't you stay on Avaya? But we're third-party vendor agnostic, right? It's our job to make sure these things work together. And what we're seeing is, I think what you touched on is coexistence. Migration's important, but coexistence where feature sets aren't necessarily ubiquitous. So one technology has a feature set that meets requirements, but then customers also want to use a different feature set. I think Teams is a perfect example of this. And so you have a situation where there's certain PBX requirements that are going to remain with their existing solution, maybe Cisco, maybe Avaya, what have you. But then they want to have more people or certain people move over to Teams. Having the ability to really elevate that decision making and that routing into an agnostic third party, man, it provides the flexibility. It simplifies things. If you want to go to Teams tomorrow and then add more or change things around, you're not locked in and you're not really relying on the vendors to work directly together, which history has shown has never been a really great solution.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree that back in the day, you would have a PBX for 10, 15, 20, 30,000 years. Right. I mean, sorry, years. Yeah. But yeah, I think having, more of an agnostic solution gives you the flexibility to, I don't want to say you want to be moving platforms every 5 years, but the longevity of a vendor agnostic solution gives you the flexibility that, hey, maybe in a couple of years when that new CIO comes in and makes a different decision, or maybe wants to move in a different direction, you don't have to rip out all that core infrastructure. You're just changing the call control piece of the puzzle, and then everybody's happy from there. The other piece that I hear a lot about is more voice modernization, moving from some of these legacy platforms. And you touched on it before. Just because you have Cisco doesn't mean you have the latest and greatest Cisco version out there. You might have, an older version that may not even be SIP enabled. You might have to bring in some legacy trunks and, things like that. So I think having the ability to help with the modernization of the voice network is also very appealing as well. But yeah, I think, from our perspective, what's most important is, even though, if you are a Cisco only shop today, it's certainly worth taking a look at some of the other options that are out there, and especially the analog, the SBC world, so that if you do need to make that change at some point, or even just bring in something else. We see it a lot, right, with a customer who has Cisco and they want to use Teams and direct routing and be able to call back and forth with each other.
Absolutely.
Having that flexibility to just basically do a quick configuration of the SBC, turn that up, and then off you go. Super powerful.
Yep.
So I definitely think this is a real conversation, and it's something that a lot of you folks out there, especially in the Cisco world, should be aware of. And really take it, take this one to back to the internal groups, if you will, and have those discussions. So before we break, Eric, is there anything else that you want to kind of finish off with on your first ever Clouducation episode?
I know. Thanks for having me. No, I mean, other than the fact that analog is still alive, as much as we didn't think it would be, it's amazing that we continue to talk about it, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again. But there's options out there that I think are cost effective and really provide what customers are looking for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we definitely appreciate you joining us here, Eric. Keep the beard game strong.
I will.
We'll maybe do it in a couple months, and we'll have we'll do our Santa Claus beards.
That's right.
But certainly appreciate you hopping on, Eric. Truly appreciate everyone out there, your time as well. And with that, we'll see you next time, and thanks for joining this episode of Clouducation. See you guys. Bye.